Thank you so much, Kalasheen. And a very warm welcome to everyone. My name is Shridhar Prabhuraman. So today, as part of this session, and broadly over this presentation, we'll essentially go through what Marine Spatial Planning Toolkit is, while I try to try to showcase the different layers that we have for MSP and how they hold much value to nation building in terms of the ocean and the development of ocean and our resources. To begin with, before we start with the presentation, I would like to showcase a small conceptual video that represents what MSP Toolkit is capable of and basically set some context around the discussion for us to go forward. I would like to request Shreya to kindly play the video, please.
The ocean doesn't come with a map that tells you where to build a wind farm, where to lay a shipping route, or where a coral reef will still be alive in 10 years. Every day, decisions about our coasts and seas are made with data that's incomplete, outdated, or static. A snapshot of an ocean that never stops moving. The result? Conflicts we don't see coming, damage we can't undo, opportunities we miss entirely. What if instead of just mapping what we already know, we could simulate what's about to happen? That's the idea behind the Neerdwani Marine Spatial Planning Toolkit, a modeling and simulation-based approach to planning our seas. Built by MRC and Neerdwani technology, it doesn't just show you the ocean as it is. It shows you the ocean as it's becoming under real oceanographic, ecological, and human pressures. The toolkit is built around 6 core simulation initiatives, broken down into nearly 30 individual projects. Every one of them grounded in verified, open-source data. Underwater noise mapping, modeling how sound from ships, sonar, and construction actually travels through our waters, and what it means for marine life that depends on hearing to survive. Coastal flood risk, simulating storm surge and sea level scenarios before they happen, not after. Coral bleaching risk, tracking thermal stress patterns to flag reefs at risk months ahead of visible damage. Oil spill drift, modeling how a spill would move, spread, and reach shore under real current and wind conditions. Blue carbon, quantifying how much carbon our mangroves, seagrasses, and coastal ecosystems are actually capturing and what we stand to lose. Marine biodiversity, mapping habitats and species distributions to identify what needs protecting before a zoning line is ever drawn. Traditional planning asks, what's here today? The Neerdwani MSP Toolkit asks, what happens next and what happens if we act differently? Run a scenario, test a new shipping route, simulate a spill before it's real. See the cumulative impact of 5 pressures stacked on one reef before a single permit is signed. This is planning that thinks ahead for a region where the stakes for fisheries, for coastal communities, for biodiversity couldn't be higher. Built for policymakers, built for researchers, built for every institution across the Indian Ocean region, working to balance growth with the health of our seas. The Neerdwani MSP Toolkit, modeling and simulation-based marine spatial planning for a region and an ocean that can't wait for us to catch up. Built by MRC and Neerdwani technology. Thank you.
Right. So throughout this presentation, we will essentially go through the different layers of what we saw right now in the video of the MSP Toolkit. The core fundamental idea is pretty simple. What we essentially want to do is move away from the existing static zoning and static data that we have in the traditional Marine Spatial Planning Toolkit. Now, what we have today has 3 certain risks that we can associate with. One is the fragmented data. So we have a lot of agencies which essentially perform a lot of data collection across shipping, biodiversity, fisheries, and all of those. But all of these agencies currently are in silos and they rarely speak to each other when we are trying to produce a particular plan. Again, not with effect of how the operations of the agencies is, but more so in terms of a lack of data sharing platform, a lack of a single place where all the different agencies can come together and pitch in the data that they have and try to understand what is the outcome before something happens. The second thing is static mapping. Now, when we talk about obtaining any kind of data in the ocean, we are basically talking about dropping a sensor, be it a hydrophone or any other form of sensors, and taking a snapshot of the data at that exact moment and at that exact timestamp. Now, basing a analysis based upon just static mapping introduces a lot of errors in terms of data and inconsistencies, because we are not covering the whole region, neither are we covering the whole timeline. We are essentially grabbing data sets based upon the availability, based upon resource constraints and other such kind of factors, which are not good enough for us to perform future stated planning. The third is currently our MSP and essentially planning around MSP is more reactive than predictive. So we don't have anything in terms of what if scenario. What we ideally want is to essentially say that if, for example, a flood risk event occurs today, then what is the same kind of flood risk event going to look like 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line with an increased sea level rise? Or if we have a shipping route that is established today, we want to be able to identify how the shipping noise is going to change if there is an increase in the shipping activity, or if you change the shipping lane, how is that going to impact the overall shipping noise in the region? So that's where the concept or the terminology of simulation basically comes from. We want to identify and simulate multiple what if scenarios, and what are the different risks that are associated with the future events. And that's where our MSP stands, differing from the existing toolkits that currently are available. But most of today we'll talk in terms of what we are able to deliver and conceptually what it means for the wider stakeholders. Uh, Two examples I want to showcase here in terms of the importance of MSPs. One in Tamil Nadu back in 2022, if I remember correctly. We had coastline erosion is not something new for the Indian Ocean region. Like 33.6% of Iowa's coastline is already eroding. Now, what we did back in Tamil Nadu to essentially tackle this coastline essentially is we basically built sea walls, or what we call as groins, to essentially restrict the erosion. Now, while it enabled the erosion to be restricted in a certain part of the region, but it did not solve the problem. What it did was it simply shifted the problem downshore to a different region now, uh, basically destroying all their fishing hamlets and all their turtle nesting. And there are communities, there are fishing communities that are actually reliant on these kind of coastlines. So what this basically means is that while we were, and this is not something that we have stated, I mean, there are wider publications that have analyzed the scenario and what else could have been done. The idea is that because we were not able to identify the sediment transportation flow, because we were not able to identify the sediment dynamics of how all of these come into picture scientifically. A local fix did not really solve the problem. It rather just shifted the problem to somewhere else downshore. Um, Another example for us to take is a transshipment hub, the Kerala transshipment hub. We all know about it, a 900 million project that was essentially built. While it failed to while what it failed to include is the fisher folk and how the shoreline erosion risk that will come along with the transshipment hub establishment. Now, what that led to was a lot of community protest, and that solved the project for years, and such as that. But the problem here is not that a sufficient analysis was not performed. The problem neither is that there is not enough data to perform an analysis, or the resources to collect the data, perform an analysis. The idea is the what if scenarios of predicting what the future is going to be based upon what we established today was missing. And that's what we wanted to introduce with the modeling and simulation based MSP toolkit. So therefore, the two key things that we are going towards is dynamism, and the second being the impact modeling. Now, dynamism essentially comes from the fact that whenever we are talking about MSP, we want to talk about not static data collected, but what is happening today in real time. So if it's about shipping noise, we want to understand what is the overall noise of the instantaneous noise that is generated by the ship in this instant, or the cumulative noise that is being generated by the ship over a week's time or over a month's time, per se, but based upon the data that we have today. This also includes an example of a fishing exclusion zones that exist today. They expand rapidly during spawning seasons, and of course, based upon monsoons and based upon other such kind of elements. So we want to be able to capture all of that as part of our MSP, and not just about what has been recorded historically. The second one is the impact modeling, as we keep talking about, for any kind of development of dredging, port, or a new shipping lane on ecosystem. We want to test the scenarios computationally before we commit any kind of resources to the particular project. Both of which essentially is enabled by the Marine Spatial Planning Toolkit. Now I'll show a quick demo of. I'll switch to the MSP toolkit that we have. I've essentially done some simulations for us to basically showcase the capability of toolkit. But the architecture of the platform essentially has 5 different layers with an extremely important layer of community engagement. Now, the first layer of the MSP essentially includes the real-time and historical data streams. Of course, whatever snapshots we have, whatever past events that we have, the flood events, marine mammal sightings, all of those essentially go as a validation part. But mostly we've obtained the real-time data from various data sources, be it Copernicus or be satellite-driven data across oceanography, biodiversity, AIS, shipping traffic data, human activities, all those things is we have a data service which essentially pulls these kind of information from various different sources. That pushes it into a simulation engine. These simulation engines, again, depending upon the layer that we're talking about, and I'll come to the 6 different layers we have. But we have hydrodynamic models to essentially simulate the flow of the river or flow of the water in terms of increased rainfall, how the river water is going to flow, climate projections, ecosystem models. Then the third layer below that is the impact analysis. So once you have a simulation engine which can simulate a certain scenario, we want to be able to identify what is the impact of that particular scenario. So that means habitat risk or acoustic habitat mapping. So if we now have the shipping noise and we have the overall noise that is present in the region, how is that going to impact the marine mammals that are present in the location? 5 years down the line, how is it going to change? What is the impact of climate change on it? So if you add climate change and if you add the increase in the sea surface temperature, how is that going to impact both the habitat risk as well as, let's say, coral reefs and all those factors? And lastly, all of this essentially is packaged and provided to the stakeholder as part of a decision support interface. We call it as a decision support, is considering the fact that the tool is supposed to be used in order to take decisions. Before we take any particular decisions, essentially validating the outcome of the proposal. And across all of this, we essentially have community engagement as a constant effort across multiple data points, which essentially means that in this particular tool, the whole idea of community engagement is regardless of whether you are a fisherman or you are an agency, to pull and push data into a particular platform, of course, with due restrictions based on the security requirements. To pull and push out of the data platform is something that should be done with ease. So we have public APIs and private APIs that allows people to essentially do that. So both even the people who are using it for proposals as well as the people who are currently existing in the community who use tools can be utilizing this. Now, the stakes here are structured. We are looking at a 2 million square kilometer plus complete exclusive economic zone. We have 4% of GDP from the blue economy that is targeting around $1 trillion by 2030. 95% of India's trade by volume essentially moves by sea, and we have around 28 millions of livelihood, which is in fisheries, which is currently using the coastal activities and the fisheries livelihood. But with all of this, and there are 4 important constraints that push us towards using MSP or basically the motivation towards why we need to perform modeling and simulation based MSP instead of the traditional one. The first one is extreme variability. Now, the Indian subcontinent experiences extreme variability when we talk about monsoon, cyclones. We have seasonal fishing, we have festive tourism, we have festive fishing seasons as well. Again, these do not have any scientific backed reasoning towards it. Of course, most of them are true when we look at it. The end outcome of it does align with the scientific reasoning. But the reason why the community performs fishing in festival durations or in seasonal durations, they more so align from a knowledge that is passed down from generations to generation. So capturing all of that is important for us. Second is the resource constraints. Now, we cannot do a blanket deployment of sensors across the complete IOR. The amount of resources that is required to perform that itself is extremely high. And therefore, we want to use simulation-based approaches to identify and model the outcome that we want rather than deploying the sensors and identifying the data. Third is the data fragmentation. Again, we have, as I mentioned, multiple agencies with data, and we want a platform where all of that can sit integratively. And the governance complexity. Today, MSP does not have a single authority, and there are multiple overlapping mandates across the different ministries in coastal and state regions when it comes to about spatial planning. So a decision support interface that allows everyone to come together also helps reduce the governing complexity when it comes to marine spatial planning. Of course, needless to say, the toolkit in itself aligns towards the blue economy and the Sagar vision that we have. Right. So when we talk about marine spatial planning toolkit, there are 6 layers that we are working with. Underwater noise mapping. This essentially includes the wind noise, rain noise, shipping acoustics, all of that. So whenever we talk about underwater noise, the key drivers at a low frequency range essentially include wind, shipping, and rain. So adding all of that into a particular platform. Second is the coastal and riverine flood risk analysis. So when we have floods and when we have storms, we want to be able to analyze what is the risk, how much area of the urban population, how much area of the non-urban population is getting impacted by the flood, which area is going to be, which across the river channel, which area is going to be a bottleneck that will lead to an overflow. So all those kind of calculations and estimations. The third is the layer on the coral bleaching and risk forecasting. So we know that like up till 2020 and even up to 2026, a large amount of coral bleach, again from IOR itself, even in the Andaman Nicobar region itself, has a lot of coral bleaching has occurred. Between 2023 and 25, most 84.5% of reefs have bleached. Now, thermal stressors is considered to be an important factor for coral bleaching, but thermal is not the only stressor that comes as part of coral bleaching. We also have, it also depends upon the wind, the nutrient composition, and as we'll see when we go to the coral bleaching layer. Oil spill and drift accumulation. Now, 25% of seaborne oil essentially transits through Hormuz. We have Strait of Hormuz, we have Strait of Malacca. Now, based upon the monsoon, based upon the wind, the direction of the wind, the oil spill and the drifting of the oil spill itself changes. So we want to be able to identify whether it was going to hit the coastline, how is it going to spread, and so on and so forth. We have a layer on blue carbon and ecosystem health. Now, we know that mangroves and seagrasses are the first line of defense when it comes to any kind of protection, again, across the floods as well as climate change events. So to be able to identify how much, to be able to quantify the overall carbon stock that we have is the objective of this layer that of blue carbon and health. And the last one is the biodiversity and habitat. Now, we have multiple species that are present in the Indian Ocean region, be it blue whales, green turtles, and so on and so forth, baleen whales. So multiple such kind of species exist, and we want to basically map where these species are present and how the migratory patterns of these species come into picture. And this is not just about identifying where the species exist today, but also identifying the food chain of these particular species. Again, we'll talk a bit more on that. Now, to begin with, allow me to very quickly demonstrate to you some of the scenarios. So this tool that I'm showcasing to you here is the Marine Spatial Planning Toolkit that we have developed. On the left-hand side, you can basically see the planning layers. This includes planning across sustainability development goals, marine environment and management, climate change risk management, so wind noise, rain noise, some resource mapping, so we can have a look at the exclusive economic zone boundaries, and all those things, maritime infrastructure, you can see the shipping traffic and so on. So if I have to start with, so we talk about the first layer we'll be talking about is the shipping related noise estimation. So if we can look at, we computed the cumulative noise for the ship. So if we consider the 1st and 2nd August. So as a user, you can essentially identify the date at which you want the cumulative noise for, and of course the frequency range for which you would want the shipping noise for. Now, if I click on generate, right. So of course, realistically, it will take a few more minutes than what we showcased here. But so what you can see on the map here is the cumulative noise that is generated from the shipping, and what shipping, if you would like to know. So if we can click on the AIS shipping traffic, it will showcase the traffic that is essentially resulting in such kind of a noise. Now, the darker regions, of course, showcases the higher noise levels as compared to the regions which are having a lower color gradient. So our noise levels go from 100 decibels up to 30, 140 decibel at 100 hertz frequency. Of course, as the frequency increases or decreases, the value changes. And this is 1 micropascal square hertz, so cumulative across the time zone of 24-hour period. Um, what you see, these small dots, is the shipping traffic that we have. And the dots in itself individually represent the noise that is being generated by the ships in itself. Because when we are talking about, and this is where the MSP toolkit essentially shines as something new. It's not about just mapping the noise, sorry, it's not just about mapping the ships present in the region, but what we do is we basically calculate the noise that is generated by the ship. So both the engine noise and also the noise that is coming from the propeller cavitation, which we know is the dominant source of noise after the cavitation inception speed of the vessel. So again, the color coding basically represents the noise that is emitted by each ship. If you hover over a particular ship, you can see which ship it is, what is its MMSI number, the speed with which it is moving, and the noise that it is generating individually without an acoustic propagation of noise happening. On top of that, what we have is basically a neural network model, which essentially is trained for this Iowa Indian Ocean region. A few years ago, we also published a paper of that, paper for a neural network model. It's basically an acoustic channel model, which is trained upon the parabolic equation-based RAM model that we have, which is basically the range-dependent model suitable for the Indian Ocean region conditions. So what it does is that based upon the sound speed profile conditions, so temperature, salinity, the depth of the water, the bathymetry of the water, it basically allows us to see how the sound is going to travel and how much amount of propagation loss is going to happen to the sound that is being emitted from the ship. So using those calculations, we basically computed this shipping noise map in itself. Now, of course, as a user, you can zoom in and zoom out. The instantaneous one essentially also allows you to select a particular region and calculate the noise level for that exact, only that particular region, and for the depth that which we want. So it is three-dimensional. It flows across multiple depths from 0 to 5,000 meters. 5,000 meters is the highest depth. Roughly 5,000 meters is the highest depth that we have in the Indian Ocean region. Now, the value here is not just on a single layer, it is about integrating multiple layers together. So as I said, with the shipping noise, we are adding AIS traffic. I added the exclusive economic zone boundary. We can understand the port management, identify what are the different ports, where it is currently present, and all those kind of things. We can also see pipelines and cables. So this is for the undersea pipelines and cables that we have. Essentially, it shows us that around the noise and the shipping traffic, which pipelines and cables exist, and at what, and again, what is the traffic that we see around it, and then so on and so forth. And of course, shipping noise is the only part of the noise, right? So we have wind-driven noise as well. So if I take 2024, June 2024, sorry. Right. So you can basically see what is the overall noise that is generated by the wind. We can also identify the noise that is generated by rain. 0 meter depth is fine. 1 kilohertz is fine. Of course, rain noise essentially computes over 1 kilohertz. It is not below 1 kilohertz. Now, if we overlap this with shipping noise, obviously because the wind and rain driven noise is having lesser intensity as compared to shipping will obviously overlap the wind and rain driven noise, but individually also they showcase a lot of information about how the climate change is essentially impacting an increase in the noise level in the ocean floor. And we keep concentrating on noise because sound is the only thing that essentially propagates underwater, and the whole ecosystem essentially is formulated around sounds. Be it marine mammals, when we talk about marine mammals, it basically means how the sound is what they use to communicate. That's what they use to navigate. So to understand what is the baseline shipping noise is extremely important, and so on. So moving back to our presentation. So if we talk about underwater noise mapping, we know that ocean is getting louder. Again, a publication by G.V. Frisk has identified how the overall ambient noise level is increasing by 3.5 decibels per decade. And that's a huge increase. And that's just climbing steeper and steeper and not going down. Now, this is driven primarily by commercial shipping, increase in the commercial shipping traffic, as well as, of course, the make and model of the shipping has now changed. It is no longer a small vessel anymore, all of which essentially contributes to the overall noise level in the region. So we want to be able to have a way to identify and also inspect, and as well as capture the instantaneous noise. And this is important not just in terms of, this is the same thing that we essentially discussed right now. And this is important for stakeholders across different aspects. Like if we talk about maritime security and again underwater domain awareness, overall, we want to understand what are the quiet windows across the calendars, which are the areas which experience lesser noise as compared to the areas which are having higher noise for ASW operations. Or if you want to identify passive sonar simulation, the cumulative baseline of the, from when we talk about signal to noise ratio, the baseline of the noise element essentially comes from the shipping noise map, because that's again a dominant range at a particular frequency. Now, for shipping ports and regulation authorities, this essentially means that now IMO has pressurized and recognized the importance of URN. Again, in the 2023 URN guidelines, it has mandated that we want to move more towards green shipping. We want to reduce the overall noise level in the region. Now, we need a tool that essentially allows us to also monitor the situation on ground as to how, like, prepare the charts, monitor the situation. If we move the shipping lane, and this has been again done in the port of southern of Sri Lanka as well, where there were endangered species of whales, and they essentially moved the shipping lane to save those endangered species of whales. Now, when we move the shipping lane, that also means that the whole noise level changes and the whole spectrum changes. So, to keeping track of all of that, along with what now IMO has proposed, it's important to have a tool like this. Talking about blue economy, fisheries, and marine life, again, as I said, the importance of marine mammal communication and how marine mammal communication interferes with shipping noise, or the other way around. So shipping noise interferes with marine mammal communication is a well-established projects. So having that noise overlap is extremely important. And again, for geopolitics and IR governance aspect as well, noise in itself is a transboundary pollutant across the IOR. So having an open evidence that support all of our operations essentially mean that we have a more cooperative ocean governance, both under the Sagar vision and the UN decade of ocean science. The next thing I want to highlight is the coastal and riverine flood risk analysis. Now, we know that the cost of so every single time now, India is not new to both coastal and riverine flood. Even what is happening right now, this is not something new. This has been happening for quite some time now, and the cost of not being able to cater for cyclones or any kind of extreme events is huge. Like the last cyclone Amphan that happened in 2020, as per the research, it basically has an estimate of $14 billion of destruction that has happened across, and the amount of money we had to put up through it. So what we essentially want is to identify, with an increase in sea level rise, with the digital elevation that we have currently, if we can perform a hydrodynamic modeling, which can basically represent the flow of water as well as the bottleneck, where the water is going to have a more, where the risk of overflowing is going to be more based upon different factors. Essentially, is what the flood risk analysis layer for us gives us. So in this layer, you can essentially, we've done it across Mahanadi, Godavari, Ravali, and other places. You can essentially select a particular river. You can select between Q10, Q20, and Q100. We can select what which range is it that we want. Of course, the design discharge is something that we want to provide as an input, again, based upon what kind of flood event that we're looking at. That's the meter square per second, the water flow that we have, and for overall how many days we want to perform a simulation for. Now, this is a fairly heavy operation, but what I'm showcasing here is basically analysis that we did using the MSP toolkit. We specifically took a very odd number of days. So if you see the run that we had a 12 hours of peak, followed by 21-day plateau, followed by a exponential recession up to day 56. Now, this 21-day peak essentially for the Mahanadi river, the plateau is essentially kept so that we can identify the worst case scenario. Obviously, realistically, you'll never have a 21-day plateau. That's way too huge. But even if something like a worst case scenario happens, then what are the pain points? What are the choke points that we currently have? To be able to identify that is what the MSP tool essentially gives us benefit of. And that's what we can see here in this image in this slide. And that's an extremely crucial information for us in terms of planning as well. So to identify both the best case scenario, worst case scenario, you can also replay the same flood event that has happened today, 10 years down the line, how that will look like, or the past event, how it would look like today. So again, this is extremely important from a disaster management and response perspective. Like a pre-computed Q100 steady state extent essentially mean that the responders, both from relief and evacuation, so you can know where exactly to concentrate your assets on in a flood risk event. Where is the probability of this happening high? So that's the kind of like the evacuation zone maps that is required, early warning that is required. All of that comes as part of this. Again, from a maritime infrastructure and port perspective, like deltas like Mahanadi have a major ports in their mouth. So we have Paradeep, which sits directly downstream. So it is extremely important for us, even from an infrastructure perspective, to understand that in terms of extreme flood event, how the water is going to flow and what infrastructure is going to get impacted. Blue economy in agriculture. Again, the Mahanadi Delta in this particular scenario is one of the Odisha's paddy heartlands. So again, it is a huge part of aquaculture. The same goes for geopolitics and IR as well, because it is shared between Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and China. So the Irrawaddy sits in the Myanmar corridor and all those kind of things. So we have multiple rivers that essentially have interconnected ecosystem with neighboring countries as well. So it's important for us to stay on top of that. Again, I took Mahanadi as a case study here to represent, but of course this applies across, including Brahmaputra and other rivers. So these are some of the simulation outcomes that we have across different water basins. This is Godavari, Mahanadi, Krishna, Irrawaddy, and so on and so forth. Again, we have put up a publication on top of this as well on our outcome. The coral bleaching and risk forecasting. Now, as I said, coral bleaching is an extremely important event. This is something that is a direct representative of climate change happening. And we have, like, there are records that are existing that prove the extent of coral bleaching that has happened. Like 84% of coral global reef area, 84% of global reef area has been bleached between 23 to 25. More than 17% of mortality at Lakshadweep sites in the 2016 event itself that happened. So thermals, like today, mostly when we talk about coral bleaching, we talk about thermal stress, which essentially includes, again, increase in the temperature and the sea surface temperature and all the aspects. But our analysis has showcased that it is, and our analysis and of course established studies have showcased that it's not just about thermal stress that is present. It also how much amount of acidification we have, what is the turbidity of the water, what kind of nutrient composition the water has. All of this essentially helps to identify what are the different factors that impact the bleaching of the coral reefs. The intent here, therefore, is to identify what are the coral refugia for the coral reef. So areas where the sea surface temperature is persistently cooler, the areas where all these factors that essentially impact the coral reef bleaching is persistently cooler, so that we can gather our resources in protecting those areas to begin with. So this is the analysis that I mentioned. So thermal only gives an R square by 0.48. But if we take other aspects like depth, wind, cyclone frequency, distance to shoreline, and other such kind of aspects, the factors increase. Now, again, it's extremely important from a conservation monitoring priority perspective. Like all the field survey capacity that we have today is scarce, and the reef coverage in itself across IOR is extremely scarce. So it is important for us to rank and understand which reefs are the ones that we need to protect first. So that ranking is what we are after with this particular layer. Infrastructure and EIA support. Now, when we talk about any kind of dredging activity or cable laying activity, and the beauty of MSP toolkit is that all these layers essentially feed into each other. Like even when we talk about marine spatial planning as a concept and not about a decision support per se, all these layers actually talk to each other. When we talk about noise essentially transmits directly to the coral stress index. So the shipping noise that we have that directly correlates to this thing. The same goes for acoustic habitat mapping and so on and so forth. Climate scenario and fisheries planning, blue carbon budget accounting. All of these are some important scenarios for coral reef management. The fourth is the oil spill drift simulation with 2 more layers to go. Oil spill drift simulation and prediction essentially means that we identify where the oil spills have occurred and also simulate, because as I said, based upon the wind and based upon the monsoon, the trajectory of the oil spill changes. And the place where IOR is situated with Strait of Malacca and Strait of Hormuz, we are looking at like around 23.7 million barrels of oils, per day is basically transmitted through Strait of Malacca and Hormuz. So it is extremely important for us to both understand, locate oil spill immediately, and also understand the flow of it. I'll skip through some of this reasoning in the interest of time. So what we have done is essentially run a Lagrangian model, which essentially has a 50,000 kg of bonylite crude and across 2,000 particles. So across a 12-hour window, how the droplet size is expanding across the different regions and how how they are spreading is what we worked upon, and we validated it against the Vacasio 2020 work that we had to essentially see that our simulation is matching the pre-existing data. Rapid response operations, regulations, and IMO compliance, all the operational forecasting that we have, coastal and ecological risk. Now, flagging when a trajectory essentially intersects with the reef, mangroves, or fishing grounds is again extremely important. That's why, and this is where I was mentioning that all these layers actually feed into each other, which is where the beauty of this comes in. Blue carbon and ecosystem health. Now, mangroves and these seagrasses and mangroves are some extremely important elements for us. But today, we have not even mapped the complete extent of mangroves. So we don't none of the figures that we have is realistic in that way. Everything is like whatever we obtain through satellite data or otherwise is a partial amount of information. So in order to be able to quantify the carbon footprint, we want to be able to, or the blue carbon stock, we want to first identify where the mangroves are present, where the mangroves losses are happening. And these are like any kind of mangrove losses, seagrass losses, like they largely remain to be an irreversible loss. And the coastal protection is gone forever. So what can we do again? And it takes a lot of time for these mangroves belt to be regenerated per se. So what can we do? Where can we essentially focus our initiatives on, and also identify with the current extent of mangroves and seagrasses, what is the overall carbon blue carbon stock that we have is what this initiative essentially is all about. Now, sustainability has been a trending initiative across all the different nations, as well as like as a global order in itself. So what kind of carbon stock and loss rate that we have mapping across the IOR, it gives an evidence towards like positioning ourselves as a sustainable development, positioning ourselves strongly towards a sustainable development goal. We want to be able to understand that in terms of any kind of storm surge, in terms of any kind of flood risk, what kind of coastal protections do we have currently, like natural coastal protections, both mangrove zone and things like that. And that's something that we want to be able to aware of. So that's broadly what we are covering as part of this initiative. Now, lastly, marine biodiversity and habitat suitability. Now we have habitat, like we have cetacean habitat, sea turtle habitat, fisheries habitat. All of these, we have snapping shrimps, and all of these that I'm talking about essentially is live today. This is something that we can see today in the MSP toolkit that we have. So what we are going for is not just the sighting of these marine mammals, but we are basically looking at what is the food. So for example, if you're talking about most of the marine mammals, the food essentially comes to the small organisms that we have in the ocean. Small organisms that we have in the ocean. Like zooplanktons or phytoplanktons, they essentially serve as the food for these marine mammals. Now, the presence of zooplanktons and phytoplanktons essentially that translates to presence of chlorophyll content in the water. So we then track the chlorophyll content to essentially identify the migratory. I mean, that's one aspect, chlorophyll content, of course, but based upon other factors such as temperature and the living conditions of these marine mammals per se, we basically identify the migratory patterns of these mammals. So it's not just about past sighting, but it's more so about obtaining the data and like using the existing data to identify the migratory patterns. And this applies, like even if we talk about snapping shrimp mapping that we've already done that mapping for, but snapping shrimp produces a huge amount of noise when they clap. So we want, and it is extremely like the sonars are very difficult to operate in the presence of snapping shrimp because of the specific reason. And snapping shrimps are extremely prone towards high temperature regions, and high temperature and shallow water regions, which is perfect for the Indian Ocean coastline that we have. So again, understanding where these snapping shrimps are present is game changing. So every single model that we have built is anchored in terms of every initiative that we have is using either an open source data or verified data that we have, which is validated against the past events or past document events that are existing, and we're increasingly trying to use it to answer policy questions and trying to identify how to make changes. Now, the beautiful part, as I was mentioning, is that no initiative operates in isolation. Now, when we have the noise as a layer, noise directly impacts with biodiversity. Again, the cumulative noise map will feed into the species hearing thresholds. Like a whale corridor which is crossing a shipping lane is automatically flagged. Now, a similar work has been done in the past. I mean, we know in the Vancouver region, with increase in the shipping noise, they had put policy changes in place to make sure that there is no shipping that is passing through the specific spot. I can't remember the name. Specific spot of the Vancouver region, while the presence of whales is identified in the region. Flood essentially goes directly to the blue carbon. We have corals. When we're talking about coral bleaching, again that impacts with biodiversity because the reef habitat suitability layers essentially overlaps with the bleaching risk that we have. So thermal stress will double the habitat loss for the species that are dependent on these coral reefs. Oil spill directly impacts coral reef. So identifying the trajectory of the coral, like having the coral reef map and the oil spill map, like all the different maps that I was essentially showcasing here. Some of these will take longer to compute, so I'm not able to present at this moment, but all of these are essentially live. So all these different layers talk to each other. They provide an input on top of each other, and that's where that's what we push as a strength of this marine spatial planning toolkit initiative that we have. So it's not, so we have potential fishing zone layer as well added. So different seasons, different months, we can essentially identify what are the which regions have where the potential fishing zones currently exist. And this on the left, you can see the shipping noise on top of the acoustic habitat map for the green turtles. Right. So that's where I wrap my presentation up for the day. The value for this platform essentially is that we have built something that essentially allows all the different agencies to come together. It allows everyone to contribute towards in terms of a shared data platform, and also policy frameworks that combine the inputs from multiple agencies and not a single siloed experimentation. I'll wrap my presentation up here, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.